Reflections with theologian Father James Bacik, campus minister and assistant professor of philosophy at Bowling Green State University in Bowling Green, Ohio.
It strikes me that our great problem in love, or at least one of them, is selfishness, the tendency to remain imprisoned in our own ego, to walk around trying to want to do things our own way, always looking out for number one. In fact, I think in many ways the culture in which we live seems to sort of intensify that kind of problem. We think of all the literature around that says that we should do our own thing and that we should look out for number one and we should make sure we fulfill ourselves. Very often I think that language is quite superficial and fails to get at the real meaning of love, but what I think it does is reinforce the sort of natural human tendency we have to be selfish kinds of creatures.
Joining Father Bacik in today's reflections is Ernie Sibley, a local businessman who has functioned as an instructor at the University of Toledo. Today's reflections focuses on the topic of human love. Here's Father Bacik.
Ernie, I want to thank you for coming on the program with me and to speak a little bit about human love as we find it in personal relationships. You and I have recently done a retreat together and talked a bit about that topic, so I think that it would be a good idea for us to address it in this setting. Feel comfortable with that?
Yes, that's exciting, Jim.
And we did have a good weekend, I think, and a lot of good ideas came up. I hope we'll be able to use some of that. Even to raise the question of human love almost sounds trite to begin with. I'm afraid that word has lost a lot of its power and meaning in our society. Some people, when you are talking about love, are thinking of toothpaste or dog food or relationships to animals. I'd like to try to see if we can't enrich that word and give it some content and to begin to look at our human experience in terms of love and to analyze it a bit, to try to see if we can do something systematic and intelligent about understanding the great phenomenon of human love. We say love makes the world go round. Love is what gives life its zest and its meaning. But I'm afraid very often the word has gotten abused, and we need to somehow give it a new formation, I think. So I'd like to zero in on the idea of talking about human love as reaching out to another person. It strikes me that our great problem in love, or at least one of them, is selfishness, the tendency to remain imprisoned in our own ego, to walk around trying to want to do things our own way, always looking out for number one. In fact, I think in many ways the culture in which we live seems to sort of intensify that kind of problem. We think of all the literature around that says that we should do our own thing and that we should look out for number one and we should make sure we fulfill ourselves. Very often I think that language is quite superficial and fails to get at the real meaning of love. But what I think it does is reinforce the sort of natural human tendency we have to be selfish kinds of creatures.
Are we saying then that the only reaching out is altruistic in essence, the only authentic reaching out?
Would be, by altruistic you mean that would not have any self-interest in it at all,
right,
and would be just attempting to do for the other. I think that probably is unrealistic when we talk about love myself. I think that whenever we're involved in love, somehow there is self-interest involved in it. I don't think there is, in my own opinion, at least a total outpouring of love for another person without some stake in it, without something working there. I remember Camus' famous remark that really only an atheist could be charitable because a Christian has some stake in it. The Christian is saying, I'll be charitable, loving, reach out to the other because then I will get to heaven. But I might want to challenge Camus and say, really, can the atheist himself be entirely charitable? Because is it not true that the atheist, in reaching out to the other, loving, acting unselfishly, and so on, doesn't the atheist get some sort of fulfillment out of it? So I'm a little leery of some of the sweet and idealistic talk about love that says it's just totally reaching out to the other, or agape, to pick up the Greek term from the New Testament, which number of people hear or know about in religious circles, as though that's the great example of love, a totally disinterested love. I'm not sure there is really such a thing. And I think it really takes us off the track. I think the kind of selfishness we first ought to be looking at is sort of the crass kind that, is this business, say, I'm looking out for me. I don't care who I step on. I got to get ahead in the business world, and there's people around who are in my way. Tough luck. I'm going to stride right over them. If they fall by the wayside, that's their problem. It's sort of survival of the fittest. Or you can see that in family life, where one member of the family may just think that all the other members of the family are around to make them happy or to keep them satisfied, that they're not willing to pitch in and do their part or share their own time or person with the others. So I think there is first of all, a sort of crass kind of selfishness that we ought to attend to and be aware of in our lives. And so very often it's a question of self-examination. And again, I don't think any of us end up escaping that kind of selfishness somehow or other. I think that's usually in the picture. And again, what my point that I was trying to make before was that the culture, I think, is somehow intensifying that kind of problem today. When we're talking about this selfishness, again, I think it's at a very personal level of it's involved in the maturation process, because let's face it, when we're growing up, we are imprisoned in our own selfishness. We think in egocentric terms, so the youngster thinks the world revolves around him and that everyone's there to take care of him. As we move through adolescence, we know that's the same kind of thing. We feel like we're at center stage, or that we're on display for everyone, or everyone's looking at us, or other people's attention is dominated by us and who we are and what we're trying to be. So we recognize that as a part of the maturation process, but I guess what happens is that very often people get sort of fixated at that level of development. And people are sitting there still living out adolescent fantasies. And again, I would think that maybe there's ways in which we look at our own experience and we find that kind of selfishness present.
I always find it much easier, Jim, to reach out to someone I find physically or emotionally attractive. Is that operating off of selfishness or self-interest? I think I'm authentically reaching out, but the fact that they are attractive to me encourages my reaching out.
Yes, I think that certainly would be our common experience, wouldn't it? We would probably all have that sense, and it is certainly a lot easier to be nice to people who reciprocate it. It's a lot more pleasant to be generous to someone who is attractive or somehow we find to be good for us, fulfilling. I think probably one of the tests of love comes when we are able to do that with someone who isn't so attractive. That's probably one of the ways of thinking about the society in which we live, that very often there's sort of the outs, the people that don't get any care or concern. There's, you think back to the 60s, the way people talked about hippies, for example, or long-haired people. Those people were sort of outcasts in the minds of many middle-class Americans. They didn't want any part of them. On the weekend we just did, there was a lady who spoke eloquently about the handicapped in this regard. It was so impressive. She was drawing on the biblical story of where the people picked up the person on the stretcher and brought him to Jesus and couldn't get him in, and went up on the roof and opened the roof up and let him down. And she was saying what a wonderful thing that there was these 4 people who would attend to that. And she was sadly saying that she has trouble getting around just by herself, and was saying that at times she would call a number of Christian people to take her to church and find out that they really didn't have time for her and wouldn't do that. That was a poignant moment in the experience of the retreat that we did. And she said what a wonderful thing it is to reach out and have someone come and help you like that. So it looks to me like in the society as a whole that there are certain groups that are out for one reason or another. People don't like them and they tend to exclude them. They're not attractive to them, and therefore it becomes harder to love them, to be nice to them, to reach out to them, because I guess there isn't that initial attractiveness. I suppose we all find that. It isn't just at the big level of a whole group of handicapped people, for example, but just in personal relationships or conversation. Someone we find attractive, it's easier to spend more time with them, and so on. But the test, it seemed to me, would be, well, how do we deal with the people who aren't attractive to us, the outcasts in society or those who are personally repugnant to us? When we begin to go on with this analysis of what the problem is of selfishness, I feel that part of it is that we get imprisoned in ourselves. I almost have that image that we're turned in, that we can't get out for one reason or another, that we feel we sort of feed on ourselves. And one of the things that happens with that is I think that it becomes empty after a while. We become sort of boring to ourselves. I wonder if that isn't part of the problem in the culture, that to just be alone, to just be a living for oneself and making progress and fulfilling oneself, that somehow that turns out to be empty or ashes in the mouth. I mean, I talk to people like that who have made it in most senses of the word, who have moved up the socioeconomic scale and who seem to have it made in terms of the culture. They have enough money and they can go and do what they want to do and vacation and all of that. And yet, in private conversation and counseling situations, you find out that they are not happy people. That somehow that autonomy that they've achieved, that independence, which doesn't involve any reaching out in love, has turned to ashes in some way. It's cloying. They find that it is not really satisfying. I don't know if you talk to people like that or if any of that resonates or not.
Yes, it does, Jim, and yet I also recall at the retreat, and I've heard you say before, people who become totally outer-oriented, possibly as an escape against dealing with themselves and the silence and the privacy of themselves. You mentioned the other night that prayer can be a way of avoiding listening to yourself. I know people who totally have to be with other people or they don't feel fulfilled. Mm-hmm. A hard time seemingly living with themselves.
You know, I think that raises deeper issues about this notion of reaching out that we probably ought to get into here. And that is, I stop and reflect on the sort of self-help books that are around now. And what they often end up doing, is seems to me, is providing us with techniques about how to improve our human relationships. So it'll tell us how to talk better to someone at a party, or how to sort of give people compliments to win them over, how we influence people, and so on. And I think it's often a little gamey, but the kind of thing that you suggest, I think, leads us into a deeper analysis of love and how we might respond to some of this problem of selfishness. I think part of this ability to reach out to others in love is based precisely on our own self-confidence, our feeling good about ourselves. And that's where I would link in this bit of silence and being able to be alone. It seems to me that when we are in touch with the deeper recesses of our own hearts, when we're somehow have confidence that we're in tune with the powers that be in the world, in popular terms, when we feel good about ourselves or have a good self-image, is precisely when we're in a better position to reach out to the other person. Then it's coming out of a fullness from within. Then it's not done just out of need. I think that what you're alluding to is really a lot of reaching out ends up being compulsive. In other words, we're reaching out to the other and we're involved maybe in causes or doing and very work-oriented and task-oriented and trying to be with people all the time, which is really growing not out of a strength but a weakness. That is, a real need for other people somehow. I'm really just projecting my own need and the others around just for me to fulfill that. I think of when I'm talking to people about to get married about this, I think that I bring up that it strikes me that one of the best postures one can be in for getting married is to say to the other, I can live without you, but I choose to live with you. It's sort of the opposite of the romantic notion of love, which is very emotional, which says something like, I can't live without you. I've got to have you. And when you start moving in that direction, we're into compulsion, it seems to me. We're not into real freedom. Then the need becomes too strong. It gets in the way of what is going on. And so my image really of the good relationship is where two people are walking along side by side and are able to work out of their own strength. So here in this case we would say reaching out then would come from confidence that I have something to give, that I have talents or gifts or energy or myself that's worth sharing with the other person. I think that one of the things that we have here is a notion that love isn't just purely a feeling kind of thing. You notice as we're talking about it, it's got sort of a more concrete, particular kind of character to it. It's one of the strengths of the Christian talk about love, I think. Christianity talks about reaching out to the other, loving the neighbor. The great example is that parable of the Good Samaritan. What's happening is there is this particular man who is laying there and needs help. And the person who comes around would be the foreigner, the Samaritan, to help him. And here you would have that natural antipathy or that repugnance built into the culture, that those two groups of people didn't like each other and didn't really get along. But here he comes along and he reaches down and he binds up his wounds and he takes him to the inn. He does all very concrete, real things with this person. And it strikes me, there is reaching out. You can talk vaguely about reaching out. You know, I'm the kind of person who loves everybody, sort of a universal love. But it remains a very weak thing, I believe. Not much is going on. And again, the culture would talk about love as this feeling or this emotion or have a high romanticism connected with it, where the kind of love I think we're talking about here has a concreteness about it, a realism, and even a heavy kind of character, that I must reach out to the other in need even when I might not feel like doing it. Ernie, when I'm talking like that, does that ring any bells with you or set off any things in your own experience that...
Well, Jim, as you expressed at the retreat, feelings and expression of feelings, and it's possible to have a feeling and yet have difficulty in expressing the feeling or the experience in an intelligent fashion, or a fashion in which the other person will understand what you are saying. It seems to me that still the feelings of love are authentic. You're putting criteria on the expression of those feelings, I think.
Yes, I guess what I want to make sure is that love doesn't just remain at the feeling level. Certainly, love has to do with the emotional side of ourselves. I would like to think of love as being a total person response to others. And in this reaching out, that we would learn to do it somehow in tune with ourselves, so that our head and heart would be together. So I would get to be the kind of person who would rather instinctively reach out to those who are grieving, that I would be the kind of person who just out of my own intuitive response would want to hug the person who was crying. I think that is where we would want to get to. Now, I don't think any of us are going to completely be able to do that, because as you pointed out, part of the sober realism is that there's some people who turn us off. Some people make so many demands on us we don't feel like reaching out to them anymore. And I think that's a lot of times where the problems come, where they simply are not attractive. So I think that the feeling level is important, and I would like myself to be integrated on that. And we would like to have our head and heart together so that we actually enjoy reaching out, or we want to, or do it instinctively. But I'm afraid that the problem is that many times we don't actually want to do that. That we don't feel like it. And there's where the reason comes in, it seems to me, or there's the great value of belonging to a tradition, a religious tradition like Christianity that says, hey, you're supposed to even love your enemies. You're supposed to do good to those people who aren't treating you correctly. And I think that there becomes a check on our own selfishness again. I would find a lot of advantage in being part of a tradition where you would go to a worship service and hear again the example of Jesus saying, hey, you're supposed to love people. And you can need to hear it over and over, it seems, because we tend to end up forgetting it. Ernie, as we were talking before and thinking back to the retreat again that we did, one of the powerful statements was in terms of the physical side of this reaching out metaphor that we're using could be very non-physical, as you suggested. It could be saying a prayer for the other person. We could reach out in that way. We could reach out simply by being able to listen to somebody else. But it also is true, it seems, that this gets expressed physically at times. Do you recall the one example that the lady gave of the hug that she received?
That was
Do you recall?
vivid.
Why don't you go over that a bit, if you recall that? She started out, she was troubled in one way or another, and there was...
I recall her talking about, the excitement, how the hug gave her something that words could not have given.
Yeah, the person never said a word to her.
Right, and that was very exciting.
Didn't she say it was one of the most significant experiences in her life? I mean,
Yes.
there was a problem at the time. She was dealing with a difficult situation and so on, and the person just gave her a hug without any words. And she said the timing of it was perfect, and it also had a long-reaching benefit. It extended over a period of time. She felt good about it, felt exhilarated or liberated or energized by that particular hug. And I think that there's something to be said for this idea of symbolizing what's inside of us and the bodily expression. That very word, reaching out, I think is a good one. It's rich. I like it. The greeting of peace at the Catholic services as we have them now strikes me as a good symbol of that kind of thing. I know you were down to our Mass at St. Thomas More not long ago, and we did the greeting of peace as a part of the Mass. Do you find anything in it that way?
We started the greeting of peace in the Episcopal Church, I suspect 3, 4, 5 years ago, and still have a number of people who are very reluctant, and one needs to sense when they don't wish their space invaded in the middle of a church service. Mm-hmm. For me personally, it's exciting and nourishing, very nourishing, but I'm sometimes reluctant to be forced into it.
Yeah.
Where I'm supposed to greet somebody when I'm not in the mood
when
to
you don't
greet
have
someone.
The feeling for
right.
it. Uh-huh. Yes. I suppose many people do feel that way, and maybe there needs to be more of an invitation character to it, like we invite you to reach out. Maybe there should be a certain freedom involved. Although liturgy, I must say, involves a certain amount of role-playing. Liturgy is drama in a way, and some things we do and say that we maybe are not feeling, but we do it because it has the power to draw us out, that it helps to stir up the proper sentiment. So I don't think it can be just one way of waiting till all the feelings are there, then I will reach out to the other person. So maybe there's something good in that greeting of peace, that it could draw us out of ourselves when we don't feel like it, and then maybe when the other person responds warmly or is nice to us or appears to get some enjoyment out of that, then maybe that somehow lifts us up or makes us feel better.
I've had that experience now that you mention it, in terms of I didn't really want to do the piece and did it as role play and felt very good about the experience, so that's certainly valid.
Yes, it works out that way, and perhaps others have experienced that as well. I think that one part of this reaching out thing that I would like to make clear here is that there really is a religious dimension involved in that. What it seems to me is it raises the question of mystery for us, because very often reaching out to another really involves a lot of risk. A lot of times people rebuff us, or they don't want our reaching out, or they don't need it at that time, or they don't know how to respond to it, or possibly when we reach out to them they begin to make even more demands on us. And therefore, if we do something now, well, then maybe they're going to want more later on. So it is really a risky business, I think, to reach out in love to another human being. And I think when we're able to do that, in one way or another, we're in touch with what I would call the mystery of life. I think that is part of the way we encounter God in life, is precisely in that risk. It's only because we could trust life as a whole that we'd be willing to do that. Only because we think we're part of a larger scheme somehow, that we fit into a larger meaning system, are we able to act in this risky sort of way and reach out? I think it really is an affirmation of life and of what I would call the graciousness of the mystery in life, just to be able to do that. And so I think even people who wouldn't call it anything religious or wouldn't relate it to God would actually be affirming something about the gracious mystery in reaching out to others. You have a sense of that, Ernie, at all, about the risk character of all of that and how that, the difficulty of it?
Yes, particularly, once again, reaching out to people who might not be attractive to me. I found that some people who aren't used to receiving what we might call warm fuzzies, when one reaches out to them, they grab a hold and won't let go. And that can be scary and frightening to me, so I tend perhaps not to reach out. I don't want to be their whole life. I just want to touch them.
Right. And I think that really is raises that question then of mystery again. If you're able to overcome that fear of getting swallowed up or of them demanding too much, perhaps that is an affirmation somehow of the presence of the gracious mystery. And this, we could easily think of this as God at work in your life, of the Spirit drawing you. Ernie, we've been talking about human love and trying to talk about it in a more systematic and intelligent way. I think that the major emphasis has been on reaching out. Part of our problem in life is that we feel selfish often. We feel imprisoned in our own egoism. And it seems necessary in life to try to struggle to overcome that, to reach out to others in love, to overcome the selfishness and try to look for the good of the beloved. Try to see if we can't help them out, especially the people in need, maybe especially the outcasts in our society. I guess we only really know that experience from within it, from when we give it a try. Then we come to know what love really means.
You've been listening to Reflections with your host, theologian Father James Bacik, campus minister and assistant professor of philosophy at Bowling Green State University in Bowling Green, Ohio. Joining Father Bacik in this discussion was Ernie Sibley, a local businessman who has functioned as an instructor at the University of Toledo. The topic of this week's Reflections was human love. If you have any questions about today's program or any ideas for topics you'd like to hear discussed, please write to Reflections in care of WLQR, Toledo, Ohio 43623. Produced in the studios of WLQR, Reflections is directed by Mark Ferguson. Executive producer is Mary Beth Kirchner. Reflections is brought to you by the Genesis Radio Network.